Okay, so we can have all our recorders begin recording. Make sure that you're saving it locally, not on the cloud.
Should we start then, Val?
We'll start right at 6 because
Okay.
attendees can't come into the webinar until 6 o'clock. So there's
Okay,
no one here
gotcha.
yet.
Okay.
I'll let you know once there's
Thank
people
you.
in. I'm going to click start webinar. Usually it starts by itself at 6, but it's not doing that today. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay.
Hello, you have entered the Zoom room for the Environmental Justice Council. Please hold for a moment until more attendees have arrived and we are ready to begin the meeting. All attendees must select a language channel, even if viewing the presentation in English. The buttons for selecting a language channel or American Sign Language are at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning has been enabled for this presentation. If you would like a translated version of the presentation slides, please go to the Environmental Justice Council website at the link in the chat. You will find a translated set of presentation slides there. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th meeting of the Environmental Justice Council, whose members are appointed by the Governor's Office to advise the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, also called by the acronym EEA, about ways to promote and achieve environmental justice principles across the Commonwealth. Can I ask the members of the council to please put your name into the chat just so that we know that you are here. I'm Rishi Reddy, the chairperson of the council and the director of environmental justice at EEA. In addition to myself from EEA, we have Deputy Environmental Justice Director for Internal Agency Coordination, Valerie Cardozo, who is monitoring the question and chat function, also called the Q&A function. And we also have Carlene Lemoyne, our Deputy Director for External Stakeholder Coordination. You will also see on the screen the interpreters in 6 spoken languages and American Sign Language. We have state staff and members of the public who are registered to observe and invited to comment on the deliberations of the council. Val, could we go to the next slide, please? We are running 7 simultaneous interpretation channels in a Zoom webinar format. We'll take a few moments now to review the logistics, agenda, and take roll call. This meeting is being recorded and will later be available for viewing through a link that will be posted on the Environmental Justice Council website. That website address appears in the chat. I remind the council members, please only use the chat function for meeting logistics and no other communication in accordance with the open meeting law. I also ask the EJ council members to speak slowly, use simple language, and minimize the use of acronyms. And please identify yourself when making a motion or a comment for the convenience of the record takers. Next slide, please, Val. This presentation is available with interpreters in Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, and Cape Verdean Creole, as well as American Sign Language. Please speak slowly, otherwise the interpreters will not be able to keep up with you. Again, all participants must select a language channel at the bottom of your screen, even if viewing the presentation in English. Otherwise, English language viewers will not be able to hear interpreters when they address the council in English. And a last reminder that translated versions of the presentation slides are available at the EJ Council website. Next slide, please. I ask that members of the public save any oral comments to the council after our formal presentation. You can also submit questions in the Q&A box, which may be addressed after the formal presentations. But if you have a question regarding the clarification of meeting logistics as we go along, please type it into the Q&A box where it can be answered by Deputy Director Cardoso immediately. Next slide, please, Val. So here is the agenda for today. Does anyone on the EJ Council have additional issues within these topic areas that they'd like to highlight at this time? I don't think so. Let me just see if we've reached quorum, Val. I'm wondering if you can help me do that. Why don't I just take a quick roll call here? Kalila Barnett.
Present.
Madeline Cook.
Present.
Thank you, Madeline. Melissa Harding Ferretti.
Present.
Thanks, Melissa. Cheryl Hawley, please. I'll come back to Cheryl. Caroline Hahn, please.
Present.
Thanks, Caroline. Namrata Kapoor, please.
Here.
Thank you, Namrata. Lydia Lowe, please.
Here.
Thank you. Marcos Luna, please.
Here.
Thank you, Marcos. Peter Mathe has told us that he is on a flight right now and won't be able to attend today. Patricia Spence, please.
Here.
Thank you, Pat. And Ari Zorn, please.
Here.
Thanks, Ari. I'll just go back. Is Cheryl Hawley here? Not yet. Okay, we'll keep an eye for her. Thank you. We've reached quorum. So anybody have any comments on the agenda if you want to highlight some topic that we might talk about today that fits into these agenda items, please speak up. If not, I'll go on to the next slide. Thanks, Val. The draft minutes for the October 27th meeting were emailed to the council members so that you'd have a chance to review ahead of time. I'd like some feedback. Does anyone have any amendments that they'd like to make to the minutes?
I don't know if this is appropriate right now, but I meant to mention last meeting, we talked about the definition of environmental justice community. And I thought that should also include It should almost be at a poverty scale, therefore including white people as well, that suffer just like everyone else.
So Ari, you're saying that the minutes did not reflect your comment that poverty should be included, so that low income people identifying as racially white would be part of the definition?
Yeah,
Are you
well, I
saying-
actually didn't state it last time and I wanted to state it now.
Oh, okay. Well, we're gonna have that as part of the discussion coming up later on today. And
Okay.
we can record it then. Right now, I'm speaking more about, was there anything that was omitted from the minutes?
My
As-
mistake.
Okay, okay. So, anyone else? Okay.
This is Marcos. Rishi, I just wanted to, I guess it's a question. The public comments that came in at the very end of the meeting are not included in the minutes. I'm not sure if we want to do that or not.
We haven't been including them in the minutes, Marcos, but they're part of the record for the meeting. And they are a public record, but are you saying that the questions that have come in were not included as part of the minutes?
I just remember there was a couple, 2 or 3 people at the end of the meeting who had a variety of comments and questions. So either I could see them included in the minutes, maybe in some summary form, or at least an indicator. I guess the question would be, where would they be found otherwise?
Mhm. I can answer that. So the reason they weren't included with the minutes was that there were a few questions that I'm still waiting on answers for, because they were related to a topic that I didn't have the answers for all those questions. So that's why I didn't include them in the minutes, because they wouldn't be ready in time. The plan is for them to be posted on the EJ webpage once those answers have been finalized. I think I'd have to have a discussion with Rishi if that means that we'd have to bring those to approval for the board.
I think that we could record those questions that come in from the public at the end of the meetings. I think that's probably the right thing to do here, and make them part of the minutes, list them as questions that have come in at the very end. So am I hearing, Marcos, that that's what you would like to have added, whether or not we have an answer for those?
Yeah, I think either method would work, just as long as they're findable, so that somebody looking up could see
Mhm.
that conversation happened. So, but if they're part of the minutes, I think it's great. I don't think that the answers to the questions necessarily have to be included.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that, Marcos, are you making a motion to do that?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the public comments be included in the minutes, even if we don't have answers to those questions that were posed.
And do I have a second for that? Namrata, I see that you've.
Second.
Okay, thank you very much. So anybody else have any amendments or approaches to the minutes that you would like to speak about now?
Not at this time.
If that's the case, I'd just like to take a vote that people are agreeing here to have the questions for the minutes that fall, excuse me. I'd like to take a vote here that we adopt the minutes with the amendments, that we will include the questions that come in from the public at the end of our formal deliberations to be part of the minutes and adopted into them. That is the motion that's out right now, and I can take a roll call for that and see if we can adopt the minutes in that manner. So with that, I will start again. Any questions on that? I think I sort of botched up the way that I stated it, but as long as people understand. This vote is for adopting the minutes with the amendment of adding the questions that came in from the public at the end of formal deliberations. So Kalila,
Yes.
Madeline,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Cheryl, I don't know if you're here.
Yes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Caroline,
Yes.
thank you. Namrata,
Yes.
thank you. Lydia,
Yes.
Marcos,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
and Ari.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we will adopt the minutes with that amendment. Thank you for that addition. I think that is a good one. Can we move on to slide 8, please? So we have we have an important announcement today in terms of EEA's draft climate change assessment is now available for public comment. Please check a link that will be put into the chat for background information. We are asking for comments through a form that is available from now until November 16th. On November 2nd, the site was updated with the draft report and a survey form as well. So there are a couple of different ways that comments can come in, and we ask that you visit that site to get the draft report, access to the survey, or a way to just submit comments as is on the site. Again, that date for the public comment period will be open until November 16th. So next slide, please, Val. So we'll move forward now on a very exciting update here from EEA, which is the a proposed update for the EJ maps. At the end of the discussion today with the EJC, we would like to move forward with a vote on proceeding with EEA's update of the maps with the most current US Census. So one portion of this is that the data update that we are undertaking is basically required because we follow the federal census, and we are required to make that update at this point. And there are some additional details that I'd like to discuss that I'm putting forward for a council vote. So next slide, please, Val. Legislation that passed in March 2021, an act creating a next generation roadmap for the Massachusetts climate policy, requires that Massachusetts base its definition of EJ population on data reported by the United States Census Bureau. In June of 2021, EEA released EJ maps identifying EJ populations by the same definition in the law, and it was based on then available preliminary US Census demographic data. Since then, the 2020 US Census data has been made more accurate. So we're required to update our maps to incorporate that data, as I said before. As a result of the council's responsibility to consider the EJ definition, we're notifying this group of that update and propose to host a vote to formalize the update. Before we initiate that vote, please note that while the law requires the use of census data from the US Bureau, there are data limitations with how the federal data is reported as it compares to the language within the Massachusetts law. In order to provide the greatest amount of regulatory certainty and to align as closely as possible with the EJ principles that are outlined in the Act, EEA intends to proceed with maps that use the US Census data as is. We expect the council to take on this issue, among others, in the coming weeks as we continue to discuss our comprehensive analysis of the definition of EJ population. Next slide, please, Val. Here we have a high-level graph map. These updates will result in the following statewide changes from the current published maps. So the maps depict demographic data as reported out by the US Census in block groups. This is as granular as the public can see. Block groups typically contain between 600 and 3,000 people. You can see here that there is the count of EJ block groups is increasing from 2,316 to 2,604. And excuse me for a moment. I'm having trouble with my screen. On this map, I just need to. On this map, the important piece is that the red block groups are depicting where EJ populations have been removed in the update. The green are depicting EJ populations that have been added. And the gray areas are where things have stayed the same from previous maps to the updated maps. There's the number of people living in EJ block groups is increasing by 12.5% from 3,100,468 to 3,487. Next slide, please, Val. I'd like to open the floor for a motion to adopt this EJ Maps update based on the federal census data. If anyone makes a motion or seconds it, please state your name for the convenience of the minute taker.
This is Namrita Kapoor, so moved.
Thank you, Namrita. Do I have a second for that motion?
I second that. Ari's on.
Thank you, Ari, providing the second on the motion. So I will take a roll call vote again on this.
Caroline's hand is up. I think Caroline might have a question.
Oh, Caroline, thank you. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I had a question about the data and whether we could, and I don't think this necessarily changes the vote, but whether we might get a sense of what, and we could see some of the specifics of the towns that actually, or communities that came off and on for the red, but if we might be able to get some more data on what the change was that caused them to be excluded, because that might inform some of our discussion later. But I'm happy to go through the vote and then have that discussion.
Okay, great. We can do that. We can talk about it in greater detail in that later part of the meeting. So let me take a roll call vote here.
Lydia's hand is up, so I think
Lydia,
might have a
thank you.
question.
Well, we can also talk about it in the later part of the meeting, but I guess I'm just, of course, would want to go ahead and have the maps with the existing census data, but have a lot of questions about what that means in terms of, getting the additional census data and questions about the, communities that are no longer EJ communities.
I think Caroline and Lydia are raising a very good set of points here, because we need to update these maps right now in order to stay current with the most precise data. But what the job of this council is to do is to review the EJ population definition. And so we will need to, by necessity, go back and analyze what the update does to our maps, the way it's affected the accuracy of the EJ population in terms of how we want that definition to read. So this vote today is to say, okay, we're going to stay consistent with the federal update, and we're going to continue to analyze the effect of it in our ongoing comprehensive analysis. That's the spirit in which I think we can undertake the vote today. It's just, a step along the way in the work, but we're going to have to come back and revisit it. It's part and parcel of what we're doing here. That's how I'm thinking about it. I don't know if other folks had comments about that. If not, then should we go ahead with the vote and then we can return to this portion of the discussion later on in this meeting? That sounds. So Kalila Barnett, please.
Yes.
Madeline? I'm just taking roll call to see if we are in agreement in our vote to adopt this federal census-based update on the EJ maps for now.
Did you hear my yes vote? I had said yes. I don't know. It came through.
Oh, no, thank you, Madeline.
Oh, sorry. I pressed
no, I didn't
the
hear it.
space button. I guess it didn't work long enough.
Okay, good. All right, and so Melissa?
Yes.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, Cheryl Holly.
Yes.
Thanks, Cheryl. Caroline Hahn.
Yes.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, and it's been so long, I can't remember who made the motion and who seconded it, but Namrata?
Yes.
Thanks, Namrata. Okay, Lydia Lowe.
Yes.
Thank you, Lydia. Marcos Luna.
Yes.
Thank you. Pat Spence.
Yes.
Thank you, Pat. And then Ari Zorn, I think you seconded it.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we are adopting these maps, the update going forward, and we will return to the discussion of how they're going to affect our comprehensive analysis as we continue with our work. So next slide, please, Val. The next topic for discussion today is the launch of the EJ strategy. So we are launching a public comment period that's open today and will remain open until January 13th. Today, I'd like to provide a context for receiving comments during this period and provide an opportunity for questions and discussion of the strategy so that the council can understand the context in which EEA and its agencies did this work. So next slide, please, Val. So EEA's authority for the environmental justice strategy derives from Executive Order 552 and from the EEA EJ policy. Those documents together guided us in developing a document that would strive to create a roadmap for EEA agencies, offices, and affiliates to meet the following requirements. They are to proactively promote environmental justice in all neighborhoods, appropriately integrate EJ considerations into departments through policies, programs, or other strategies, identify and promote agency-sponsored projects, funding decisions, rulemakings, or other actions to further environmental justice through the Commonwealth, demonstrate the fair distribution of benefits that has been measured, and then to consolidate all of the agency's strategies into one strategy and to be finalized by a date set by the secretary. Next slide, please, Val. Just as a reminder, as we move forward in this discussion, the EJ task force, of which you met many of the members a few weeks ago, worked hard to develop this document over several months. Guided by EEA's EJ team, the management at their own agencies, and interviews that they conducted with agency staff, the EJ task force was the primary author of this comprehensive first ever document. Next slide, please, Val. The document contains a chapter for each agency's individual strategy. Combined, The strategies describe a comprehensive approach to advancing environmental justice in the Commonwealth. So we will see some common aspects in each agency's goal setting when you take a look at this document. There are commonalities in terms of setting goals for metrics to measure EJ progress, equity in hiring, communication and training, community engagement. And you'll also see that each agency's strategy is tailored to its own specific mandate. Specific grants that that particular agency or office disperses, enforcement obligations, cumulative impact analysis when it's required, technical assistance opportunities, and other issues that are specific to each agency. So next slide, please, Val. Here is, we can just, there we go. So there's a current schedule for our rollout you'll see on this diagram. We are planning in-person public listening sessions on November 28th in or near Boston. We're planning another one in the western part of the state in or near Springfield, and we'll release the specific venues soon. We're also planning 2 remote public listening sessions during the daytime and evening on the day of January 10th. Public comment period closes on January 13th. And during these 8.5, 9 weeks, we will have the website active so that we will have a form in which people can type in their comments. We'll have the strategy available for download. And we will also, in the next week or so, make available a more concise way to submit comments through a survey where we will ask for answers to questions that we are specifically curious about. So I just want to open up the floor a little bit here. I think, Val, you might take down that slide for folks to just, if we have any questions or want to have any discussion about the strategy itself. I'd love to hear some of those now. And Val, if it's possible, it would be great if you could drop into the chat the link to the strategy so folks can see that. Are there any comments on this?
Not
Thank
a comment. I have not had a chance to review this. And maybe I missed this in your previous comments, but just can you clarify like where this discussion about the strategy kind of fits in the prior, like the work that this council is supposed to be doing? Yeah, so just bring those together a little bit.
So Kalila, this document took us 2 years to put together through the task force. And because it is, it's a directive document to the agencies developed by agency staff themselves. And it's a way to give EEA agencies a roadmap and a plan of action going forward. And because one of the 2 functions of this council is to help advance EJ principles and advise the secretary in doing so, we would like to present this strategy to you and take in individual comment, or we may decide that we want to have some sort of joint comment on the EJ strategy during this public comment period. And that would be very informative to us to get some opinions about it.
Thank you.
It's a long document. I will tell you it's about 150 pages. So it is a pretty comprehensive document. I see Namrata's hand up.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Kalila, because I had sort of a similar question, and I am just glancing through the document now, and I see that very early on, it has a definition section. So at a minimum, that will be something that we'll want to look more carefully at and sort of see how does that jive with the definition that we're all talking about as well.
And it should also give a clearer picture, I think, of the way that every agency works and the way in which their function will specifically be affected by the EJ population definition. My hope is that we can all take some time to look at this document and lay out time on our agendas we have 2 more meetings, I believe, before the public comment period closes. On January 13th, we will have a November 21 meeting, and then we have an early December meeting. So ideally, if folks would be able to take a look at this take a look at this strategy, and be prepared to discuss aspects of it, perhaps even put together, a list in writing or do some brainstorming about the strategy, that would again be helpful to us in incorporating edits, after January 13th.
Rishi, I'm wondering whether, similar to, I mean, for the documents that are so dense, does it make sense to have kind of a, maybe not on this call, but a summary similar to what we did last meeting for the CCP, is just kind of like, here are the highlights and how do we, and I'm wondering if that's also useful in the listening sessions as well, that it's not just, here's the in-depth document comment, but here's some of the points and the highlights that we'd like people to take note of, and that might be useful. And certainly us reading it, and would love to send in kind of thoughts, and if we could kind of figure out the forum to do that in advance, that'd be great as well.
Okay, so I just want to say, I want to identify for the record takers that was Caroline Hahn. So Caroline, if I could just recap, what you're saying is would there be a way to somehow highlight the major points that you feel that the council should be focusing on?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm just taking some notes on this. Anything else that folks would think could help in our subsequent discussions about the strategy? Are you thinking that we could put together a list of questions specifically, Caroline, that the council might answer, or are you feeling like the highlight of the issues would be by subject matter?
I think it would be great to have a kind of almost an outline, a highlight of the subject matter areas, but certainly if we have questions before the next meeting, maybe that's a way it could come together. I'm not quite sure. Do we kind of collectively send them to individually to Valerie, or does it make sense for us to have kind of in between smaller groups just to kind of pull together the thoughts? I guess procedurally, I'm not sure what the right way is to do it, but look for your recommendation.
We can certainly collect, you all could individually send in questions to Val. I mean, just being respectful of the open meeting law piece. We wouldn't want to have discussions or email conversations around the substance of those, but we could certainly ask folks to send in questions to Val, and we can consolidate what those questions are. We could send that document out as we're going to talk specifically about these issues as the strategy deals with them. That may be a way to do it. And then, I could add my piece there about where I think the EJC input could be especially valuable. So we could certainly do that. We could do something that is akin to what we did with the CECP last time, which again, this is another very long-term project that's been in development for a couple of years. And here is our council coming in sort of at the tail end of this. And so how are we going to comment on it? But the strategy is very much a living document. And since we're in draft mode and we will be incorporating changes, it will be open for our input, for a while. We will have a couple of months here to affect some change that we think might be warranted, or to make comments that we think are warranted. I think these are really good ideas, and I'm very happy to do, you suggested 2 or 3 things here. I'm happy to perhaps do all of them. We can go back and figure out how we can focus this group's attention where it could be most effective. Do other people have ideas that they want to suggest for this? How we might go about commenting on the document? If folks have other ideas, please send them in to Val, and we will consolidate these and put them together in some way so that it can help our discussion for next time. And it will also give you a chance to get some, you'll have some time to be acquainted with 150 pages. And I also just want to say, one piece of this is because of issues around translation and prep time under the open meeting law, we do need to get agenda items up, at least 48 hours before the next meeting. But I think that this will all go under a general agenda item for discussion of the EJ Council. So, we will group that in under that large discussion heading so that folks know we're going to address that. And, this group is going to look at the strategy with some thoroughness. If there's no more questions on that, I'd like to move on to the next topic. So can we get the next slide here, Val? So we're returning to our issue that we opened up last time. And this, I think, is the mainstay of our work for this moment. I wanted to just remind folks what we had done previously. So can we move on to the next slide, please, Val? So here's a reminder of the EJ population definition that we're working with. I would also like to just talk for a moment about some of the ideas that came out of our last discussion, also as a reminder. Several good points were brought up. I'll be taking notes on this discussion so that we can put together a document that's highlighting the things that we are finding to be worthy of further discussion. And I'm hoping that by the next meeting, we'll be able to parse those topics out in a way that can move us forward. So just as a reminder, let me state some of the issues that were brought up last time. As part of this discussion, I'd also like to raise some of the process by which we might consider grappling with the EJ population definition, and I would like this to be part of our discussion today as well. So some of the issues that were brought up last time. How do we practically implement the environmental justice policy definition if a certain population group is smaller than a block group, or it traverses several block groups, or is otherwise diluted. We had an issue come up with that indigenous and native populations may not trigger the threshold in certain block groups. A point was raised that the boundary of indigenous homeland areas does not match the US Census boundaries. And a fourth issue, in less populated areas, census block groups don't capture low-income populations correctly. And that's because out west, neighborhoods are not always carved out in the same way. So that was by way of reminder of last time. I'd just like to raise a process issue again here. We can talk about the manner in which we can deal with these issues as they arise and how folks might want to do that. Should we make a list now of these issues as they come in and then talk about parsing out what further research might be needed? Or should we talk about perhaps establishing subgroups that do that work and then come back to the larger group? These are some of the issues that I'd like to raise under process. But before that, we go to that route, I would like to open up and continue the discussion that we had last time if there are other individual areas that we feel that are not quite captured in the current EJ population definition. And Ari, I think I heard you say one at the beginning of this. One thing, if you wanted to restate that now, that can launch this discussion.
Well, yeah, thank you. Unless I missed something, it just, once again, there's the rural areas that just get left out, and just basing it more on a poverty scale that is more inclusive, not just the map to me personally, but a poverty scale, which is more inclusive to the many people that live in these areas and suffer.
And are you saying that the current EJ population doesn't take into account a certain grouping there?
Yeah, unless I'm reading it wrong, it just sounds like, I understand why we're here, but it uses the word minorities. Does that not include white people?
Okay, I'm making a note of that. There are others. So I'll add that I think that there are some areas that are strangely represented on the maps, areas like Logan Airport or Miles Standish Park, where they may come up as EJ areas, and it's not exactly clear why in terms of the population. So that's an area, that is an issue that has come to light for me. I see two hands up, Melissa and Lydia's. I don't know what order they came up in. I'll pick on Melissa first, just because she's higher up on the screen.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to sort of make note. I'm glad you mentioned the discussion from previously, but I think that, the word minority is difficult for Indigenous people because sovereignty and having political power, Indigenous people, although we're often classified as a racial minority, we are political entities because of the membership and the sovereignty and self-determination that we are, allowed through the law. even with a state recognized tribal community like ourselves, we may not be federally recognized as of yet, but we are a federal trust tribe and we still have rights through the UNDRIP. So I just wanted to make that note that the word minority doesn't necessarily apply to Indigenous people. And as you said, that the map is problematic because it, you know, it doesn't include those neighborhoods or all of them. I see that some of the tribes on there are on those maps, some of their areas, but there's others that are not. So just wanted to make sure I note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And then Lydia, please.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I mean, I've been, thank you for the background material that you recommended to us. I've been reading that and I found it extremely helpful. And I think that these formulas were put together with a lot of thought by people who, you know, have thought this through a lot more than me. But I guess my main concern is whether the current percentages will continue to capture EJ communities, particularly where there are small communities, and that which may also, and also where many small communities, particularly in urban areas, may be experiencing displacement and gentrification. And you know, I think there are arguments different ways about what that gentrification might mean, but you know, in a lot of cases, I think it doesn't mean that the original EJ population, low income people of color, have received a real improvement in their living conditions. Often it means that there are just a lot of wealthier white people who have moved in and changed the demographics of that, you know, particular neighborhood. So just, I don't have an alternative proposal about what's the right percentage or whether, you know, because there are a lot of different, you know, there's the 40% and then there's 25% and the, you know, neighborhood, you know, income compared to the statewide median household. So I'm not sure whether, you know, whether those two formulas will address that or not, but that's just something that I'm flagging as a concern.
So Lydia, thank you for that. I just want to raise one issue here. There is a component of the definition that allows for the secretary to assign a sub-block group geographic area, so smaller than a block group. There's a way to petition and have an area taken out of the EJ population definition, and there's a way to, even for the secretary on her own, to say that a geographic area smaller than a block group is indeed an EJ population. So with that, we don't have implementing regulations for that yet. They're in development right now. Does that, I just want to highlight that as perhaps that is one way in which the issue you're raising can be addressed, and maybe not. And if not, you know, why not? What's being missed by that? So I know that the rationale behind that provision was to address issues that you're speaking about now. But, you know, the question then becomes, is it working or will it work? Are there other comments?
Well, it seems that that provision, to me, is starting to address Ari's point about more rural communities and capturing, you know, those block groups sometimes don't capture that kind of sub-block group and the poverty rates within those sub-block groups. So, you know, I can't say whether it will work or not, but it seems to me that that is in part trying to address what Ari and Melissa, I think, and Melissa, I'll look to you to weigh in here. But it seems like breaking those block groups into smaller subgroups would start to address those geographic areas that don't match up exactly. But it just seems intuitively, it seems like it would work, but I don't know, others might have more experience with the data.
Thank you, Madeline. I just want to say your name so that for record keeping, we know that it was you speaking. So I'm hearing that there's a number of issues, I think, that are surrounding the Indigenous population and the way in which the definition does not include them. There's a number of issues that seem to be around whether we are actually capturing folks that are living in communities that are smaller than block groups. And there seem to be a number of things around that that have to do with gentrification as well. There may be a connection with the Indigenous aspect. There's issues out west that present themselves around poverty and whether, Ari, it might be that your point about that, I think, is really focusing on whether the poverty criteria, meaning the 65% of the median household income for Massachusetts, is actually capturing, regardless of race, self-identifying race. The question is whether that is capturing what's happening out west, is I think what you're saying. And
Yes, exactly.
okay. I have issues around Logan Airport and Miles Standish Park. And then I see Cheryl's hand up and then Lydia's.
So I guess my question, I think I asked this question a few meetings ago, but why does the EJ population definition have to be chained to place? Why does it have to be an area? Why can't all of the people who are, 65% below average in income be considered an EJ population? Why must it be tied to place?
So I might just even reframe that to say, as we're looking at the EJ population, is there a way to define an EJ population without being hooked to place? Like, can we formulate some way to speak of EJ population without having it be a geographic space? And then Lydia, I think I saw your hand up. Am I right about that?
I just forgot to take it down.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm kind of, this is Kalila. I'm curious. I'm really intrigued by Cheryl's comment. So I'm curious if you had like an example of what you're talking about, because part of what I had been thinking about in terms of criteria. And so I don't know, I'm not totally clear on like what sort of the boundaries are on, what will end up a part of this, but I mean, basically just thinking about some public health criteria, because, obviously race and income are indicators, but in the environmental justice movement, we talk a lot about the health impacts of being close to polluting facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there's a number of like documented data and criteria that's used in other, not in this particular EJ policy, but in other places to describe and kind of paint a picture of like the dynamics in EJ communities.
Can you give an example of that, Kalila, with public health? Because I'm intrigued with what you're saying there.
Yeah, I definitely would hear, I was like asthma rates.
Mhm.
Just, you know, as one basic example, you know, and in some of the resource materials that you provided, you know, proximity to polluting facilities. So, yeah.
Could we talk a bit more about if the way that we've tried to define environmental burden has always traditionally been tied to place, I think, because we've thought about environmental burdens as polluting facilities that impact a certain geographical space around them. Or we've talked about, you know, water, the soil, air has always been around a geographical space. So if we were to, I think we have to be a little more open to thinking about ways in which environmental injustice is affecting the indigenous community, which, as Melissa pointed out, you know, there are populations that are federally recognized, not federally recognized, or the area is not large enough to be caught in a block group. I have to come out very honestly here and say, I'd like to learn more about that. Like, what are the ways in which the indigenous community is suffering from environmental justice in a way that we could capture in the definition? Like, is there a way that we can word that?
You mean some sort of quantifying way?
Yeah, Cheryl, like how, you know, I want to learn a little more about what is it that could capture some of the ways in which the indigenous population is disproportionately affected through environmental burdens, that, you know, we could articulate that.
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of it for, you know, that I think of right out front would be, you know, the loss of and access to lands that we hunt and gather on. You know, solar farms are being built all over our traditional homelands currently, and these fields are taking 300 acres of prime, pristine pine barrens that we're no longer accessible and can get our food from and sustain ourselves. So that's sort of where I see it from. Access to the waterways that we used to fish that are either polluted or no longer have, you know, the population or otherwise. So I guess that's where I come from, because we spend a lot of time, and my children have been raised that way. They're on the water, we're in the woods, where we live off what my Aunt Verna, who was an elder of the Herring Pond tribe, born in 1905, who I always talk about, she would call it living off the fat of the land. So we suffer in that sense. So I guess that's where I would go with that.
So so Melissa, and I'm gonna just ask really basic questions around clarification. So pardon how basic the questions are. So just from a policymaking viewpoint, it's that the indigenous population is living in a certain location. That may be where the homes are, but the land that's precious, that needs to be available for the fishing and the hunting, and is in another location, and it is under different ownership. And that's what's being lost. Is that am I laying out the situation correctly?
Well, it's that it's being not, it's always been under, I mean, all the lands have been already, taken. It's really not the fact of ownership, because the Aboriginal rights to fish and hunt those properties and the easements are inherent. So we don't need permission to go walk through that property technically. But when it's covered with a 200-acre solar farm, then there's nothing else living there. So I guess in the sense where the habitat has changed so drastically because of these environmental issues, that we no longer have that food source, if that makes sense. I know it's really complex.
I think it is complex. It's a totally different perspective. I mean, this is our Aboriginal culture that's being acted. It's us as people. So we be ourselves if we don't have access. And I don't know, I guess the whole thing is really very, very complex. I'm thinking about water, clean water. So I live in Worcester, and there's like 40 different fresh waterways in Worcester, lakes, ponds, streams, whatever. Not one of them is drinkable. So if the water system failed, so all people with money are going to buy the water out of the stores, right? And what is everybody else going to drink? I mean, what are they going to do? Get on buses and go to somewhere else to get water? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
thank you, Chief.
This is, it's almost like a flip way of the way that the environmental justice maps are currently depicted. It's where
Yeah,
the resident.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I think we had discussed this, I think way in the beginning when we started the conversations, and we had talked about sort of layers for the maps that sort of identify, but even that's difficult, like Chief Hawley had said. So, it's really about resources, clean water. I mean, exactly. That's sort of where I was going with that. If the land isn't accessible and the shellfish, you can't eat it, then that's a huge environmental justice issue for us and our families, whether we're considered a minority or a sovereign nation or not, I guess. So yeah.
I mean, I would propose something here that I don't know if other folks would agree with, but I think the very first step here is the folks in this group need to be made more familiar with just the outline of these geographic areas. Which could at least ground some of this discussion. I'm not sure, as we move forward, how we would obtain that. I mean, is that?
I think that because Massachusetts has a inherent obligation to the people that they once called wards, that they managed, and the people that have treaties to just simply add indigenous tribes to the EJ population, regardless of where they are, when they are, or anything like that. I mean, Massachusetts is obligated to us. So that goes way beyond our time, place, now. So those treaties are still intact, to my understanding.
The definition of indigenous is included in the EJ population definition through a circuitous route. And in the EJ policy, when they've defined minority, quote, minority in that policy, the indigenous population is included. Now, this is counter to, or perhaps it is beside the point, given what Melissa said earlier around tribes as political entities. So it looks like as if what we would be seeing there is we need to word that in a way that reflects what's really, you know, out in the Commonwealth here. So that to me, and we're looking at that in terms of the EJ policy as well as the definition that's included in the statute, because the definition that's included in the statute, I don't think has that piece to it that the policy has. I don't know if anybody, if I'm wrong about that, if other folks wanted to jump in, but that's the way I've read it so far. So I see here like a number of, so there's two things around the Indigenous issue. One thing is the straightforward definition, Cher, as you've said, of just, you know, we need to have the words that include Indigenous straightforwardly in the EJ population definition. But the way in which we are going to implement that needs to be somehow depicted on the maps and somehow identifying those spaces, you know, which are the traditional grounds. So I would love to hear from anybody else, because this is not easy stuff to, you know, eke out of a brain.
Well, I think we're talking about two things. Like Melissa said, tribes, or some tribes have a unique and sovereign situation or relationship with Massachusetts. And that's different. So part of the EJ definition could include those tribes, and it can be worded so that it captures that legal obligation between the state and the tribes. And then there are Indigenous people who are not part of tribes, who are minorities. I'm part of a tribe. I still consider myself a minority. That would be captured in the other EJ, the regular EJ definitions. And then as for outlining tribal areas, I mean, there are maps galore to do that, or to help with that at least.
Okay. I'm taking note of all of this.
And it's very tricky as well. I mean, I realize it's very complex, and this is why it's really important for us to be in this room, in this space. You know, is hunting and fishing, then there's off reservation, on reservation. State tribes, well, what is your reservation? Is it your allotted lands from the lands that you originally had? You know, and there's a lot of sort of really gray areas for all of us, I feel. So it's tricky, but I'm glad we're talking about it, and this is where, you know, this conversation happened. So thank you.
I'm wondering if one way to get our arms around these issues is if 2 or 3 folks might volunteer to put together a list of what, you know, to encapsulate some of the things that we've discussed today, so that we can do a little more research on them and talk about them as a group. Because I think we're pinpointing some real changes to either language or maps in the way that they're depicted. And I do recall speaking individually with folks about having an additional overlay. Melissa, you and I spoke about that. I can't remember. Cheryl, we may have spoken about that too previously, but it seems that is, you know, that type of depiction may be what happens with the maps as an additional overlay. So is that something that we could perhaps put together for the next meeting or the meeting after that, so that we could, I think if folks had a document to look at it would help their understanding, and they could even go in and do some of their own research in terms of educating ourselves, educating this council. We could go back and look at the issues and speak about them more intelligently.
Yeah, if Chief Hawley's willing, we could maybe meet and see if we can come up with a couple of maps between us. I could certainly share the Herring Pond allotted lands and, just our territory from my perspective. And I'm sure Chief Hawley has some information on that, just for an example of sort of what that looked like. And go from there. Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. And I always
Yeah.
love seeing Chief Hawley.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
I think that would be really helpful for this council. Thank you for doing that. The other large issue that I see that came up again today are the issues out west. So could we speak a little more about, Ari, you raised it first. I've heard these issues before. I don't live out west, and I would love to delve a little more into these issues and the way in which you and others who are on the council know about environmental burdens out there in a way that the rest of us could understand.
Yeah, I guess I'll restate it. I'm just, there's many, I live out in South Egremont, which is near Great Barrington out in the Berkshires, not too far from Pittsfield. There are just little pockets of, I don't know if you want to call them communities, but people that don't make much money, living in little rural, little pockets, spaced out, little clusters. I just feel like this doesn't include them. And that's people of, all colors.
So I might just bring up the capacity of the secretary to include sub-block group populations. I'd like to just read out a little bit of that so it can go into the record, and as well, we can consider it now. So hold on just a second. Here's how it reads. This is part of the EJ population definition paragraph. So that if a neighborhood does not meet said EJ population criteria, but a geographic portion of that neighborhood meets at least one criterion, the secretary may designate that geographic portion as an environmental justice population upon the petition of at least 10 residents of the geographic portion of that neighborhood. So this is the piece in which, I don't know if it would, if I can share my screen, folks. Val, I'm going to try to do this, if I screw it up. Can people see this? Here. Here's the EJ. I just want to, could I get an indication that people can see this?
Very small.
Very small.
Small
Okay.
print.
And very, okay.
Rishi, at the bottom right, you should be able to zoom in. Oh, you figured it out.
So right here, thank you.
Mhm.
So right here, we've got, here is the definition that we're all talking about. And it ends here. The second portion of this definition is the part that I alluded to before that says that for a neighborhood that does not meet said criteria, but a geographic portion of that neighborhood meets at least one criterion, the secretary may designate that geographic portion as an EJ population upon the petition of at least 10 residents. So this is the piece that I'm wondering, and I'll stop sharing now. This is the piece that I'm wondering, does this address some of the issues out west that people have raised, or can it?
This is Ari. Well, certain communities that I know of, I know you want to call them communities, they're so rural. You could have a mansion. I mean, you know, some CEO's country house, and across the street are houses that are, you know, just people that don't have any money. You know, you can have 6 or 7 of them just spread out in the country. Meanwhile, these areas are looked at as so pristine and desirable to people, but there are families that have lived there forever that have nothing. So that wouldn't quite encompass that.
Because the value of those other homes is outbalancing the income criteria. Is that what it is, Ari? I see. Okay,
Yes.
okay. And is that the main way that that's happening out west?
That was just one example. The other one was brought up by someone else. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but with gentrification, you have people moving in and the value of homes going up and the area becoming more desirable, yet you still have people that have nothing.
I think that's very common here as well. I mean, we live in, you know, I live in Buzzards Bay currently. It's, you know,
Who's
the Cape is
speaking? Who's
Melissa
speaking?
Ferretti, sorry.
Thank you.
Melissa Ferretti, yes. And I feel it's the same here, you know, Plymouth, they're all, Plymouth isn't even considered an EJ community at all. And it's not quite accurate. So I think that happens a lot on the Cape here as well. So thank you for that, Ari.
I mean, it's,
So can I ask a question? I think that the EJ populations based on these census blocks and tracts and whatnot have to do with, and I might be wrong, but have to do with like the proximity to some sort of environmental danger. And I think that even in a wealthy neighborhood, very poor people don't have the capability to react to environmental danger the same way as all the wealthy people around them. So it doesn't really, even if there's only 5 people and there's 10,000 people in that area, they still deserve that extra protection because they're not able to care for themselves the way the wealthier people are. So that's how I feel about the western part of the state. Yeah, you're not capturing these poor people living in between these very nice houses or huge plots of land, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve as much protection as somebody in Boston living in a big neighborhood with lots of other people that are considered EJ population. But maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way.
I mean, I'm seeing that there's a lot of issues around this criteria around income. What was raised here is not just about, although it may be particularly egregious in terms of the rural areas, all of these examples seem like they're saying that there's something that the income criteria is not able to pick up. So when you talk about gentrification, which is happening in urban areas, which I think Lydia spoke about first, the rich homes in the poor neighborhoods, or that these type of issues are happening not only out west, but they're happening in Plymouth and the Cape. Is there something about the income criteria that warrants, and the way we've described it, that warrants greater attention?
Isn't the income criteria, you have to have a certain amount of people to make a difference? I think that's what it is.
It's if the block group's income level taken by household, so household by household, if the median household income level is equal to or 65% of the average, the Massachusetts income level.
So people with very high income could skew that completely.
Yeah, this is Lydia. I mean, I think mostly the way that the definition would mostly catch people, but I think there are, for instance, in Chinatown, we have extremely luxury housing right next to extremely low income housing. So even within a block group, that may, sometimes that gentrification does skew the demographics. It's like, I think we figured out that within like the couple of census tracts that, the white income is 6 times the Asian median household income. But I think it's the combination of the income, the level, number of people of color, the language, that between those you may capture. But I feel the other thing is the piece about cumulative, what's the term?
Cumulative impact.
Yeah, cumulative impact, I think is really critical. Because, the question is, suddenly you have all of these luxury white residents, coming into the neighborhood. Does that mean that cumulative impact didn't happen? No. Over time, maybe there will be some improvement if you have a bunch of, wealthier residents, but that's not clear yet.
I just want to interrupt for a second. Sorry, Lydia, if you were in the middle. I'm trying to paste the entire EJ population definition to everybody in the chat, which I think would allow folks in the council as well as in the audience to see it. And I'm not, for some reason, able to do that. Val, are you able to do that?
Yep. You want me to post the definition, the EJ definition?
Yeah, I think Madeline had just requested that. If we can send it to everybody, though, that would be great.
Okay. I can also share my screen for the slide that has that. Which would you prefer?
I would prefer it being posted in the chat just because
Okay.
it's nice to look at people, but I don't know how
Okay,
others.
I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay. I'm sorry, Lydia. I didn't know if anybody had a response to your comment. I mean, this to me is really, it's raising an issue around what are we looking at when we're looking at these low income areas of the Commonwealth in terms of environmental justice. So if we're looking at as gentrification is moving into a certain area. What is it that we're trying to do to advance environmental justice principles through this definition? If these are we're finding that this criteria is missing things both in the rural and urban areas.
Rishi, this is Marcos. Wanted to just add my own thoughts here too. This is immensely educational for me at this moment, thinking about what I'm hearing too. So this is really interesting, and it makes me, as I'm looking at the policy, I'm thinking it, in some ways, the definition is describing EJ places rather than EJ populations in a way, and it was designed from the history at that point about what we thought of as the issue, which was junk being placed in certain communities and folks having to deal with those burdens. And so just a couple of points I wanted to just add to this conversation. I don't think that this is designed at the moment to go beyond that. It's not designed at the moment to go beyond that way of imagining the EJ problem in a lot of ways as a place-based issue, but mostly where certain folks are placed, obviously, where they live. Even though, ironically, I think behind the whole concept of environmental justice, it's an acknowledgement that certain historically oppressed, marginalized, ignored populations have been the subject of these things. So I think we wanted to capture groups and individuals who are being denied, equal protection and respect. So I'm thinking a couple things. One is that in terms of continuing to identify where the holes are, one would be what people are already offering to do, which is to identify spaces in the Commonwealth that are that are not getting captured, which seems really straightforward. Like we could say, if we had an interactive charrette style exercise where folks look at an actual map of some sort, they can kind of crawl over and say, that spot right there, that community is not, or the people who live there are lost, or this area is important and it's not getting captured or attended to in the way it should, thinking of indigenous claims to land and territory that's important, that's if nobody's there who's capturing that, hitting that threshold, then it's not going to get captured. So just different ways of identifying it. The other thing is, it's occurring to me now too that the EEA strategy on environmental justice, it's probably that much more important as a way of thinking through the implications of the current definition and what it's missing, given what the EEA strategy is proposing to do. So if we looked at, for example, the various divisions that are planning to implement some kind of strategy to incorporate EJ into dealing with natural resources in the Commonwealth, right? Where will the EJ policy, what will it do for us in that space? Because up to this point, the policy has been primarily used as a way of regulating development or projects that have air pollution impacts. And that's kind of been, so far, the only thing that's been clearly defined in terms of when an EJ community trigger happens. But the EJ strategy is going to be much wider than that. So that might actually help, where I'm going with this, that might help us further define where the holes are in the current definition, is by looking at how the state plans to try to implement this definition, if that makes any sense. And I'll stop rambling there.
I mean, I certainly think that's a really fertile discussion to think about the way in which this strategy is going to intersect with the work here. I fear though that even some of these things that we've identified now, and I agree with you, Marcos, this is really humbling, even this short conversation today. You know, we're looking closely in this initial conversation at the minority criteria, what we've called the minority criteria, and we're looking seriously at the income criteria. You know, I thought the income criteria would have been the most straightforward one, but clearly there's all these other nuances as well. So I do think it is a way for us to consider the strategy, and I think it's a very opportune that both of these things are open at the same time. You know, that the strategy public comment is open at the same time as what we're considering here. This is raising, I don't want to cut off. Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, Lydia, please go ahead.
Well, I'm just a little confused because, you know, the definitions talk about environmental burdens, environmental benefits, and then environmental justice population. And I think kind of what what Marcos was saying is the section on environmental justice population, it seems to be actually kind of divorced from the environmental burdens piece, you know, to have like more, you know, in order to have like these numbers and, you know, kind of like some hard criteria, but but actually it's the intersection of those that's really critical. And it's both, you know, at a given moment and also historical, and also the overlapping cumulative impacts of different types of, you know, injustices. And that's what struck me. And as I was reading those background materials, I was just getting angrier and angrier, you know, and feeling, and then I saw that, you know, I read the paper that was in 2005 and saw that downtown Boston was actually had the most extensive cumulative impacts of any community in the state, and then was the second most intense. And I was like, wow, you know, who knew? And I think, you know, that was 2005 when Asians were still like a much more significant percentage of that downtown population. And, you know, of course, they were not using as precise measures, you know, at that time, but you know, it just made me think like now, knowing that, you know, the census, you know, the area that we've outlined as Chinatown, you know, is like 48% Asian, you know, and who knows where it will be, you know, in 10 years. But those, you know, the impact of all of that, all of those environmental impacts, they go on for decades and decades. And it was just making me more and more angry about this. You know, we've been having this conversation with DOT about soil remediation underneath our only recreational park, and feeling like, yeah, we should actually, you know, we should actually stand up for more thorough remediation, you know, given this history. I don't know.
So I'm feeling, you know, there's a couple of things here. I want to leave time for questions from the public, because I think we will get probably a lot of great comments from folks who are watching on this topic. But I'm wondering too, what would be the best way for this group to move forward? I mean, we've looked at two large issues here, Indigenous issues and the rural I want to call it the income issues, both as it pertains to rural and urban. What's a path forward that people think we can address the work of this group? Like, what is the process by which we might talk about this in the future, Melissa and Cher and I might want to be involved in the conversation of how that comes together. Which I think could help facilitate discussion with this group when we, bring this work back. And if you don't mind, I'd like to arrange a meeting around that, to put that type of document together to bring back for this group to deliberate on. The income piece, I'm wondering if we might have a couple of folks who might want to put together some of the topics that we talked about today. Now, I'm thinking that this is a decision, we should make a conscious decision that this is how we want to proceed. Like, do we want to have one or, a couple of people put together like a very short document listing out some of the topics that are most pressing in that particular arena so that the group can come back and deliberate on them? Is that one way forward for the group? Or would you all rather have another session like this where we're talking with a little more of sort of a brainstorming, brain dump type of thing on other issues that have been brought up? Because I don't think we've covered them all, but we have pinpointed some here that are very worthy of further deliberation. So just if we could spend a couple of minutes thinking about that, then we can move over to some comments from the public. But are there any opinions about this either way?
This is Marcos. So I like it. I propose that we have that running list of topics that have come up so that we know what we've already said, and then we could continue to add with that. I do like the idea of maybe a subcommittee approach to the topics that are concrete and people have a stronger sense of. And I'm hoping that we'll also arrive at a point where we can make it more concrete for everyone too, so we can identify very specifically where this is happening. And I'm not sure if that will make sense as a research project in a sense of having to ask for other resources to sort of provide the data or information that we need to kind of assess it, or if that's something that we could do through some kind of a group exercise or other activity that would allow us to kind of really see what that looks like on the ground when we say this is getting missed, or some of the way to make it more real for folks to kind of like, maybe it'll help us identify possible solutions or proposals about how we could tweak the definition or rethink it. So yeah, so that would be my suggestion about how to proceed.
So I'm sorry, Marco, so are you proposing that we do go forward with separate? So I heard you say something about a list. We could have an ongoing list, and I am very happy to start that out.
Yeah, so we have a
Yeah,
current list. We have at least one sort of subcommittee or one group is going to work on one of those issues or one of that cluster of issues. The other one sounds like the income and rural area topic, which I'm happy to be involved with too, because I'm awfully curious about how we could make that work and where it's falling flat or not working. And whatever else comes up, then I'd say, but like I'd want to be moving toward a point where we can identify the issues concretely enough to kind of see them in some better way.
Yeah.
But in the moment, yeah.
so let me work on that list, and that we will send out to the group. The subcommittees, perhaps what we should do is, once we get together with the list at the next meeting and we add to it, we can spend some time adding to it. Maybe then we could talk about perhaps partitioning off into separate groups who would be able to work a little more on each topic area. Does that sound like one proposal? Marcos, have I captured what you've said?
Yes.
Does that make sense to folks? Do people have comments on that?
I guess my question is, just sort of in terms of like the use of our time, I guess sort of like a big kind of broad, I don't know if like this exact format necessarily makes sense if there's not something like new questions being raised or something that people have done to kind of dig into.
Mhm. So, I definitely think that if we go off into subgroups or working groups, Kalila, that those working groups would need to come back with some type of concrete proposals. The question is, where are we at right now? It seems to me like where we're at right now is formulating the list, gathering a few more pieces because we have not really looked at the language issues yet. And there's a lot there. And I don't want to start having, separate, to do too much decision-making until we've encapsulated the way that each criteria may be interacting with each other. So I would just like to have the language, some discussion around the language criteria first before we, come back with concrete pieces. So what we might do is partition this off for next time that we can focus a little bit on language issues. I will put a list together of a running set of topics that have come up. Melissa and Cheryl, we can put together a separate short document to just catalog what we've talked about, which will be part of that list. And then next time we can focus our discussion on language issues. And if people want to add to these two pieces as well, we can, the income and the minority. Does that sound like a way forward for our next meeting, at least? And then we can perhaps talk at the next meeting about breaking off into work groups. We can take up different topics and come back to the larger group, because I agree with you, Kalila. We need to be focusing on specific things. Does that seem like a way forward? Can we take a straw poll on that? Unless folks have, okay.
That's good.
Madeline, how about you? Yep. I saw Melissa nodding her head and.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Yes,
Sheriff, yep, okay. Caroline, I'll just take a straw poll here if this is a way forward.
That works.
Okay. Namrata, I think I saw you nod, yes, and Lydia as well. Ari, okay. Pat. Okay, and Marcos suggested it. So I'd like to go out to the audience now. And do we have any questions, Val?
Yeah, so just a reminder, attendees can type their questions in the Q&A box, or they can raise their hand and I'll give them the ability to ask their question. There were 2 questions that were typed in that I'm going to read out loud, and then there's one person with their hand up. So the first question is, how will you make sure that residents are aware of the possibility to be included as an EJ community?
I'm sorry, Val, will you read that again?
Yep. And this question has to do with the opt-in provision. So how will you make sure that residents are aware of the possibility to be included as an EJ community?
That's a good question. It sounds like as if we need to do more outreach around that possibility, and I can understand that folks are not yet aware that it's there.
Okay. And then a question about the map update. When will those be published?
The material on the maps update is available on the website right now. And there is a tab for the update, and there is a tab for the previous draft of the maps. Each of the EEA agencies is going to be implementing that in their own manner, and along a timeline that will make sense for their own specific program. We've asked that they do so by early next year. And if folks are interested in a specific program, they should check in with the implementation schedule for that program.
And then, give me one moment. There were a few that came in earlier. Okay. Sorry, there were a few that came in early. I'm trying to find. Okay, there was a comment actually that came in about the EJ definition and how it should include the cost of living in relationship to the income the person receives. This person also had examples of elders living in senior housing who are paying a majority of their income in rent. So just to repeat that, the EJ definition should include the cost of living in relationship to the income the person receives.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I don't see any other, oh, I think a question just came in. Can you please clarify if all or most residents within an EJ Block group are low income?
Can we
Well,
please?
So the question says, can you please clarify if all or most residents within an EJC are low income? So I'm a bit confused by the question. I think they're referring to EJ Block groups.
So low income is one of 3 criteria that identifies an environmental justice population. And the population right now, part of this discussion today, has been identified through the geographic designation of a block group. So income is one of the 3 criteria, and there could be an environmental justice neighborhood or an environmental justice block group that's been identified solely because of income. I hope that answers that person's question. Is there any more?
Yep, I'm looking through it now just to see if there are any other ones. Nope, there are no other questions. There were comments in the Q&A box that should be, the council members should be able to view, and they'll also be included in the meeting minutes. One just came in. Can we submit comments or only questions at this point? You can submit either. I think we have a few more minutes, right, Rishi?
Yes, yeah. If there's, is there still another comment coming in?
There was just a person asked if they can ask their question. I believe this is a comment. Communities should be defined more broadly than just a geographic designation. The definition should include distributed population categories such as indigenous people living across many areas, not concentrated within a census block. Same for poverty. People of color dispersed in non-EJ triggering blocks, etc.
Okay, thank you. Were there others?
I'll give one more before we move on to the next item. Consider expanding beyond the existing criteria to include other factors, example, public health, pollution burden, etc. Look to Cal EnviroScreen, for example.
We do actually have a definition of vulnerable health population, which will be part of the discussion of this group for sure. And Cal EnviroScreen is a great example in many ways. Thank you for that comment.
Could you please repeat that last part, Cal, after, could you repeat that? I can't understand what you're saying.
The California state government's mapping tool, which is called EnviroScreen.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to, if there's no more questions, I just want to reiterate what we'll be doing next time is for the meeting, I'll have a running list of issues. I'll be consulting with Melissa and Cheryl about putting together some of the more complexities around the Indigenous issues. Next time we will discuss the language criteria specifically. I'm hoping that you all might find some time to review the EJ strategy so that we can continue some discussion about that, and we will figure out if the best way forward is to separate out into working groups so that we can do a little bit, we can between meetings do a little bit more work on additional research or issues that we need to highlight to make this a more concrete discussion, so that, as Kalila pointed out, we might have specific asks at each meeting going forward around each of the criteria. So if there's no more questions, are there any suggestions for a future agenda item? Please send them to Val. And if you have any other feedback, please do so. We're all in this together. It's not been done before. And we're trying to do something that I learned today is pretty more difficult than I thought it was. I was already thinking it was pretty difficult, but now it's coming across how difficult it actually will be. So I'd like to open the floor for somebody to move to adjourn.
So moved.
Who was that? I'm sorry. I missed-
Melissa. I'm sorry,
Thank you, Melissa.
Frank.
Okay, I'd like a second, please.
This is Madeline.
Thank you, Madeline. And we can take a quick roll call vote. Kalila, please.
Yes.
And Melissa and Cheryl, please.
Yes.
Caroline,
Yes.
Namrata,
Yes.
Lydia,
Yes.
Marcos,
Yes.
Pat. On here, and Ari.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we are adjourned. Thank you all for your time today and your expertise. And most of all, you know, I think these are really difficult topics that we are attempting to address. They require a great amount of humility, showing how much we don't know, as well as how much we know about the lives that each of us have lived specifically. And it's even more difficult to do, if I may be honest, in front of an audience that's watching us, to be talking about these difficult things. So I appreciate that we're all making this attempt together, and that we can go forward in that spirit. So thank you for all of that today. And I would also like to say thank you for all of the volunteers on the state staff who are coming to these meetings from 6 to 8, especially to do recordings, so that we can have those recordings posted in all of these languages on our website so that they are more accessible to people on the Commonwealth. So thank you very much to our state folks who are doing that for us, and for everybody here who's making it possible. Thank you to the interpreters. All right, we'll see you next time.
Time.